Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you back to the Dynamic Decisions podcast, where we explore the strategies that drive successful decision making in the world of business. Why? Because the best decisions come from great conversations. I'm your host, Tisha Cable, CEO of C Model Data, and today we have a leader in talent management and human resources who has been instrumental in building scaling high-performing teams. Her name is Laura. She is Vice President of Talent at DNS Filter. With a deep background that spans building recruiting functions from the ground up to leading global talent acquisition for high-growth tech companies, Laura brings a very unique, results-oriented perspective to talent-driven business transformation. Laura, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. I'm super excited that you're here. Could you start by just sharing a little bit more about your role at DNS Filter and how you're really helping brands to unlock their potential through talent strategy?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tisha. I'm really excited to be here. As you mentioned, I lead talent at DNS Filter. DNS Filter is a cybersecurity company that helps organizations protect their users from online threats. On the people side, my focus is creating a talent-dense environment where great people can just do their best work. I spent most of my career in hypergrowth tech startups, helping companies scale intentionally, not just in numbers, but in capability, culture, and leadership.
So the talent landscape itself has really fundamentally shifted. There's the war for talent narrative that's really evolved into something way more complex with remote work normalization, as an example. You also have the impact of AI augmentation of roles, even though we know that we're just at the very tip of this happening. What I want to know from you is, have you seen the emergence of skill-based hiring really challenging traditional credential requirements?
Absolutely. When I started my recruitment career 15 plus years ago, it was all about where did you get your degree? What was your GPA? And that was the focus of the talent war. Everything has been flipped upside down. Most of the companies I've recruited for recently, especially in the tech space, don't care about degrees. It's all about what skills do you bring to the table and your mentality. Are you naturally curious? Do you have emotional intelligence? Some of the softer skills are really bubbling up with the emergence of AI because anybody can code now. It's, can you get along with your peers? Are you going to learn the next skill that comes up with AI? Everything has changed.
Yeah, I really like that. I like the focus on what we call the soft skills, which are really just people skills, right? So we labeled them soft, but really, to me, they're core and fundamental. So meanwhile, all of this is happening. Cybersecurity companies like DNS Filter, you have these unique hiring challenges, competing with tech giants for specialized technical talent, also needing to move faster than traditional enterprise cycles really allow. When you're building your talent density in this environment, how do you navigate the tension between hiring for today's immediate technical needs versus building the adaptive capacity your organization will need as threat landscapes and technology stacks really continue to evolve?
That's a great question because in cybersecurity, things change literally every day. So the skills that are required today might not be the skills that are required in 3 months. And so we care about core skills for every role. Does the candidate have the capability to do the job that's needed today? But more importantly, do they share our core values? Do they have a natural curiosity? Are they eager to learn? Are they adaptable? Are they flexible? In an environment like ours that changes all the time, they need to be able to navigate the ups and downs with us and be excited about that. So we look for candidates who have aligned with our values more so than who have the skills, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned aligning with the values. And I think a lot of times organizations aren't really thinking about how important those values actually are, especially in the people management process. So you can utilize those values not just for hiring, but also making decisions about whether or not you keep them.
Mhm. Exactly.
Yeah. So you guys added about 50 team members in a 6-month time period post your Series A, which is really an incredible achievement, which is all about execution and speed. But I have a little bit of a deeper question. I would love for you to kind of walk us through a moment when this velocity and quality were in direct conflict, when you had a critical role that needed to be filled quickly to meet maybe like product roadmap commitments, but the candidates who could start immediately weren't the ones who you would evaluate, as high on your talent bar. I really am looking for, like, how did you weigh the cost of leaving a seat empty against the long-term consequences of a compromised hire? And was there a framework that you used to help you to make that call?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it all starts with your talent brand. So as a talent leader, I consult with a lot of early stage tech companies where the name recognition just isn't there. And we are competing with some of the big players where everybody knows Google, everybody knows Amazon, and we're fighting for the same talent. And nobody knew DNS Filter when I joined back in 2021. But we really focused on building a great brand. So what did we as a company bring to the table that was unique? If a candidate had multiple offers on the table, why should they choose DNS Filter over some of the larger names that they knew? And it was all about the leadership that we had in place, the product being competitive in the market, and then something unique that was different from all of the other companies. And for us, at the time, we had a flexible work week, so we were doing rotating Fridays off. Not a lot of companies were thinking in that way. They weren't as progressive. And so that was something that we had that the other companies didn't. So in addition to the competitive product, a compelling industry, great people, good core values, we also had something unique.
I love that. Matter of fact, I tell people all the time the most important thing that a company can do is constantly create unique value. When all the repeatable mundane tasks are all done in the world with AI, for example, the last thing will be using human perspective to create something new. So, this idea of really focusing in on what is unique, I think is really, really core. And I hope our audience is taking that away. So, in this shift, kind of staying along this high volume hiring shift, in this shift from high volume hiring to talent density represents this, it's really a fundamental strategic pivot that a lot of companies are going to or do struggle with. So, it isn't about just hiring fewer, better people. It often also means making very difficult decisions about existing team members, right? Who may have been right at a certain phase of the startup, but may not fit like scale up needs. So when you're trying to implement a framework like this that could inherently raise performance bar, how do you balance the human cost to individuals who may have been there in the very beginning and they really helped to build the company up, right? Against the competitive necessity of elevating the organizational capability at this time.
I think that's one of our biggest operational challenges. So making sure we have the right people in the right roles. The company we were 5 years ago with 40 employees is so different from who we are today. So the skills and roles that got us to where we are today are not necessarily the skills and roles we need to get us to the next big milestone. And it doesn't mean those people no longer fit. It just means the business is evolving and the people need opportunities to evolve with it. And so everything we do is revolved around talent density. So we want to create a high concentration of high performers who are deeply aligned with our goals. And to do that, we need to match the skills to impact. And sometimes that means rethinking roles or moving people into new areas where they can shine, regardless of their title or tenure. Just because you were a product manager for the last 10 years doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a product manager for the next 10 years, depending on the
Yeah.
needs of the business. And so we really try to have meaningful conversations with the people about how important it is to make sure they have the right skills that meet the business objectives and help upskill them as much as possible.
And then what do those conversations look like with the leadership about the real human impact of your density focused strategies? How do you guys talk about these things together?
On the leadership team, we talk about our biggest leverage point being our people. And we don't want to treat the people team or any employees like a cost center. We need to consider people as our product. So when you understand how the people create value, it's just as important as understanding how your technology or your product creates value. And so all of the leaders that I work with understand how to treat people the same way they treat product development. And then you experiment, you optimize, and you scale.
People are the product. And by the way, I got a new framework just now from you. I love a good framework. Right people, right role, right time. That's the that's the new framework. Not that it's new. People say it, but they don't say it like I just said it. So
No, exactly.
okay. So you guys have achieved really good metrics, 98% offer acceptance rate, 70% reduction in time to fill. I'm really curious about some of the meaningful indicators that don't show up in those numbers. Like retention data might tell you that someone stayed 18 months, but it won't tell you whether they felt psychologically safe enough to take risks or whether they built relationships that made them effective beyond their job description. I would love to know how you measure the qualitative dimensions of hiring success. Things like the cultural contribution, the mentorship capacity, the innovation mindset. You've talked a little bit about mindset. These things that ultimately determine whether someone can become a force multiplier or just a warm body in a seat.
I think that's where it goes back to talent density. And I talk about it all the time, but talent density is not just the percentage of employees who have high marks on their performance reviews. It takes into account those other skills, people who are moving the needle, people who are leveraging AI, people who are making an impact across the business in a really meaningful way. So, of course, yes, we're looking at all of the data from performance reviews, but we're also looking at the top 17% of the company. What was their actual impact? And usually it's an impact across multiple functions. So they're outside of their own function. People know who they are. They can talk about their work. And it also has a correlation to business objectives and revenue.
Boom. That's it. And if anyone wanted to know how to solve world peace, it's all about outcomes in the exact way that Laura just described it. You have to be able to tie everything to impact. It's just like, why are we doing anything if we can't measure how it's actually moving the a needle, any needle, the needle that's planned, whatever it is. Really good. This message is for our audience. I want you to think about your organization's talent strategy and talent acquisition efforts. What talent-driven decisions have created the most meaningful impact on your business outcomes? Share your experiences with us on LinkedIn and other social media using the Dynamic Decisions podcast. All right, let's talk a little bit about your leadership. So you've operated across dramatically different contexts, right? Post Series A hypergrowth, post IPO scaling, post acquisition integration. Each one of these phases creates fundamentally different talent challenges. Startups, they really need versatile generalists who can thrive in ambiguity. Mature companies need specialized experts who can operate with process rigor, do it exactly like this 5 times. And then when you're building these recruiting strategies across these stages, how do you help leadership teams to understand that hiring people, that the profile that they need, the one that got them there, could actually prevent them from getting to the next place? Like, what does it look like when you have to challenge a founder's vision of the ideal, I believe team members should look like X? Maybe because their mental model is anchored in either an earlier or a later stage. Just an example.
Yeah, it happens often. So when I join a company, they're starting from scratch. And so the key there is to create early credibility. So I'll focus on one or two visible wins that solve real pain points for the business. They'll say, oh, this is driving me crazy. Okay, solve that need. That's a quick win. So something that people can really notice and feel. And that starts to build trust pretty quickly. And then it opens the door for bigger conversations about strategy and scale. So then at the same time, I'm always communicating to the leaders about the why behind what I'm doing. So I'll say, here's the short-term fix, but here's what we're building toward to create sort of a sense of partnership instead of just support. And then over communicate. I over communicate in the early days so that people feel informed and not surprised. And then they'll start to see progress and understand the direction. And that's what builds momentum. And then the momentum becomes contagious.
I like it. Inform, don't surprise is a really good one, right? Really good one. I like it. And then, of course, momentum is incredibly important. I think we underestimate the power of momentum and how it actually gets driven. So you just gave a framework. Hope everybody was listening for how you can actually drive drive this momentum, which is actually required most of the time for business leaders to be able to get a company over humps or get their employees over certain humps. So I want to jump into my favorite thing to do. If you've listened to this podcast, then you know my favorite thing is the decision-making persona assessment. So what I am going to do is explore your decision-making style through this persona assessment. I'm going to ask you 4 different questions that represent different decision-making approaches. And after each one, you're going to tell me how much the way that I'm asking the question resonates with how you actually approach your decision making. And you'll have a scale of 0 to 100%. But the thing is, and a lot of people get hung up on this, believe it or not, you only get 100% across all 4, and I won't be giving them to you all at once. You'll have to go one at a time and then tell me why, give me your percentage, and that's kind of how it works. So there's a little bit of like hidden trickery in this exercise that people tend to catch on to as they start, oh, I know why you're doing this, but go with it. It's just for fun.
Sounds
Right.
good.
Okay, here we go. The very first one is called the feeler. It's a values-driven leader. So this persona prioritizes alignment with core values and mission, often weighing the human impact and cultural fit of decisions alongside business metrics. So when evaluating whether to implement a new talent assessment tool or restructure our hiring process, I ask myself, beyond the efficiency metrics and cost per hour improvements, what are the human consequences of this decision? If this system screens out candidates who don't perform well in time assessments, but might be brilliant in actual work context, are we systemically excluding neurodivergent talent or people with test anxiety? If we prioritize speed to hire, are we creating a pressure cooker environment for our recruiting team that leads to burnout? Even when the business case seems compelling, I need to reconcile whether we're extracting value from people, candidates, employees, our own team, or creating sustainable conditions where everyone can genuinely thrive. So, Laura, how much does this approaching decisions by asking yourself those kinds of value-based questions resonate with you?
I mean, that's a huge one, especially in the work that I do. It's all about people and the consequences for the company. So that's going to be a big one. Let's see. I mean, I would say at least 40%.
Okay. So right now you are 40% feeler. Okay. Let's see. Where do we go from here? Our next one is called the planner. It's a strategic visionary. So this persona focuses on long-term implications and future-proofing decisions, always thinking several moves ahead and considering multiple scenarios. So when making strategic decisions about talent infrastructure, whether to build an internal university for skill development, invest in employer brand, or restructure compensation philosophy, I ask myself, What are the second and third order effects of this choice across multiple future scenarios? If remote work continues normalizing, does this decision expand or constrain our geographic talent access? If AI eliminates certain roles but creates demand for AI oversight positions, are we building skill sets that transfer for specializations that become obsolete? If a recession forces a reduction in force decisions, does this talent strategy create optionality or lock us into rigid structures? I need to map out how this choice shapes our capability to respond to futures we cannot fully predict, whether it's competing for talent in an overheated market, managing through contraction, or pivoting our model entirely. So, Laura, how much does that forward thinking, scenario planning approach to questioning resonate with how you think about decisions?
That's definitely how I approach every job that I've had, because whether you're a 40-person company or a 4,000-person company, you need to be ready for scaling. So when I come into these smaller organizations, I say, if we doubled in size tomorrow or tripled in size tomorrow, do we have the foundation where we would be able to do that? So this certainly resonates. We'll give it 20%.
All right, 20%, 20% planner. Okay, here's the next one. This is one is always fun, always fun. It's called the counter. That's the name of it. It's the challenger of assumptions. So this persona naturally questions conventional wisdoms and looks for contrarian opportunities, often finding success by zigging when others zag. So, when the entire talent industry is obsessed with candidate experience, employer brand rankings, and elaborate assessment centers, I ask myself, what if the conventional wisdom is wrong? What if companies spending millions on recruitment marketing are solving the wrong problem? What if the real constraint isn't candidate attraction, but internal decision making speed and hiring manager clarity? The cybersecurity industry has normalized obscene hiring timelines and multi stage interview processes that mirror the deliberate risk averse culture of the sector. But what if DNS Filter's advantage comes from being willing to make faster decisions on less information, betting on trajectory over proven track record? What orthodoxies has the talent function accepted? Job descriptions, degree requirements, interview stages, probation periods that we could challenge to create competitive advantage precisely because everyone else is stuck in the same old playbook. So, Laura, how much does that assumption, challenging, contrarian style of questioning resonate with your decision making process?
I love this category so much because in my personal life, this would be like 95%. And in business, it's certainly important, especially when you're practicing progressive HR. This is why there's a whole backlash against SHRM right now, which used to be the governing body of all things people and talent. A lot of us who practice progressive HR are anti-SHRM now because they're stuck in the dark ages.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would give this 5 to 10%. I mean, it's important to challenge assumptions and to be progressive.
You got to pick one.
All right, we'll give it, what am I at? So I'm at 40%, 20%, so 60. I'll give it 10%.
10%. All right, you ready?
Mm-hmm.
This one is called the data driver. It's an evidence-based decision maker. So this persona relies heavily on metrics, analytics, and concrete evidence to validate decisions, preferring proof over intuition. So before committing to major investments in talent programs or restructuring our acquisition strategy, I ask myself, what does our data actually tell us about the relationship between hiring source and long-term performance? Not just time to fill or offer acceptance, but 12-month retention segmented by hiring manager, promotion velocity by candidate source, performance rating trajectories that indicate trajectory versus plateau. I want to distinguish between vanity metrics that make us feel good and leading indicators that genuinely predict business outcomes. That said, I'm also asking, what matters deeply, really deeply, but resists quantification? How do you measure someone's capacity to navigate ambiguity, or their ability to build trust across functions, or their judgment in novel situations? The analytics might tell us this candidate checks every box on paper, but what signals, qualitative, gut level, relationship based, might the data be missing that only emerge through human evaluation? So, how much does this data driven, evidence focused approach actually resonate with your strategic decisions?
Yes, this would easily be the rest of the 30%. And it evolves, right? So when you join a smaller company, you often have to make decisions based on incomplete information, or you're not sure you can fully trust the data, but there is always some sort of data to evaluate. And then you run it by a gut check. And then as the company scales and grows, you typically have more data to evaluate, more people to bounce ideas off of. But I always am balancing that against the gut check still. So it's important to evaluate decisions based on data, and you work with what you have, and that what you have changes depending on the stage of the company. But the last step is always the gut check.
So this is the insight that you just gave about, because I often hear from like, sorry, oh, we're really small. Like we're not really ready to think about things like this. The truth is there's always data, right? How much of it is coming out of like a system that belongs to you is one question, right? It might be that I'm starting with benchmark data in a space as baseline to develop some core assumptions. And then from those assumptions, I can then start to validate or invalidate whether or not those are accurate. And then my data grows. So the most specific thing in this insight that you just gave is all about data over time and the ability to use that to balance it against your gut. Because even in a thing like decision intelligence, we're not getting rid of the human component. Your expertise lives in your gut. Like I've seen this a million times. And so of that million times, the result looked like X. But the data, then that evidence grows in order for you to continue to validate whether or not that thing that you think is actually good or not. That is awesome. So you are 40% feeler, 20% planner, 10% counter, and 30% data driver. Thank you for participating in that. So we're going to wrap up our conversation, but I have a final question. So you've helped organizations across diverse growth stages to really build their strategic talent management and really open up their potential, and to be able to scale successfully, scale being a key factor here. If you could give one piece of advice to leaders who are looking to leverage talent strategy for meaningful business transformation, what would that advice be?
I have seen so many companies underestimate the impact of a strong hiring strategy, or worse, just look at it as getting people in the door. But as you scale, it's not just about adding headcount. It's about raising that talent density that we've talked about. You need people who are naturally curious, adaptable, emotionally intelligent, and motivated to grow with the business. So my advice would be invest in the people who build your people. Get someone who deeply understands how to attract, assess, and develop talent. Because in a high growth company, the right hires don't just fill roles, they're changing what is possible for that business.
Loving it. They're changing. Come on, what is possible for that business? People are going to people, and that can work for you or against you. So that is really great. I want to thank you so much for sharing those insights, Laura. It's been an awesome, awesome experience having you on the show. Your approach to talent strategy combines all of this efficiency, data-driven methods, and really focusing on building a high density, future-proof culture is actually inspirational, and I appreciate it. So would you share with our listeners now where they can learn more about you and more about DNS Filter?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again, Keisha. This was a lot of fun. You can always find me on LinkedIn, Laura Durfee. My profile's everywhere, and dnsfilter.com. We're a great solution for any size business who wants to protect their people.
Come on, let's go. Protect your people. And for our listeners, I want to thank you for tuning in. Remember, the best decisions come from great conversations. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to subscribe it, rate it, share it with your network. Let's keep the conversations going on social media using Dynamic Decisions Podcast. And until next time, keep questioning, keep growing, and keep leading with purpose.